Hi everyone, welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to be building a simple REST API using the Django REST Framework. So Django REST Framework is a set of tools that allows us to build web APIs on top of the Django web framework. So it provides us with the different tools that can make it easy for us to build APIs on top of Django, as we're going to see in this video. So my name is Ali Jonathan, and on this channel I talk about programming and related things. So if you feel you're interested in such content, please subscribe and please like. So let's continue. So what I'm going to do is to start by creating a virtual environment within which we are going to install the dependencies specific to our project. So I'm going to pull up my terminal. I'm using Git bash, so feel free to use CMD or any other tool. So what I'm going to do is to say Python. So this is going to be Python -m, then I'm going to call venv as a command, so I'll say venv, and then I'll specify that our virtual environment is going to be env. So right now, right here are some of the routes I'm going to implement for this video. We're going to have these specific routes with the different methods, and we're going to see how to do all this with Django Web Framework and Django REST Framework in general. So what I'll do is to pull up my terminal again, still creating our virtual environment. After creating this virtual environment, what we're going to do is to basically activate it and then install the required dependencies for our project. So after the virtual environment has been created, the first thing we're going to do is to activate it. So I'll say source env and then scripts, then activate. So our virtual environment has been activated. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to install Django. So I'll say pip install Django. Now after installing Django, the next thing I'm going to do is to create a Django project. So think of a Django project as a set of configurations that are necessary to run our Django application. So Django provides us with a project that is a root of all the configurations. So to those configurations, you can be able to attach the different apps or web applications that can be able to run our entire project. So what I'm going to do is to create a project. So I'll say, in this case, I'll have Django admin as a command since I've installed Django within our virtual environment. So I'll say Django admin and then start project. So this will help me to start a project. So what I'm going to do is to call this the to-do project. So this is going to create a folder called to-do project within our directory. So within to-do project, we have another folder called to-do project, and then we also have a file called manage.py. So the manage.py file is going to help us to administer our entire application. It's going to help us run commands for our databases, for creating super users, as you're going to see. So right now, what I'll do is to go to my terminal and then enter the to-do project. So after entering the to-do project, what I'm going to do is to say Python manage.py, then I'll run the server. So this is going to start our development server. And right now our server has started and it's running at localhost 8000. So you're also seeing that our db.sqlite3 has been created. So db.sqlite3 is the initial database that we are going to use for this video. And feel free to use Postgres and other databases. So if I head over to localhost 8000, we now see that our Django installation has worked successfully. So let's go ahead and set up a Django app. So I'll go back to VS Code, and what I'll do is to basically, so our focus is going to be within the to-do project. So I'll do is to stop our server, and right now what I'll do is to start an app. So think of an app as a web app that holds a specific functionality. Now in this case, we are building a REST API, so we're going to have the different functionality that's specific to our to-dos within its own application. So I'll go ahead and create this application. So to do that, I'm going to say Python manage.py, then start app, and we're going to say that we are starting an app that we're going to call to-dos. So this is going to create a file right here, which is called to-dos. So within this file, we have the different specific things, the different specific functionality that is going to be specific to the to-dos. So we have the admin that's going to help us to register our app onto the admin dashboard, like we're going to see. And we also have the apps that's simply going to map the configuration of this specific app to the main app. We have our models file where we're going to write everything that's going to be about our database. We're also having tests where we can write the specific unit tests for this application of to-dos. Now we have views, which is going to contain various functions that are going to help us to make requests and then turn those requests into responses, as we're going to see. So the first thing we're going to do is to register this application that we've created onto our main project. So to do that, what I'll do is to come within the apps folder in our to-dos, and what I have to do is to copy the class name of this config. So what I'm going to do is to copy to-dos config, and then what I'll do is to go to to-dos project, and then in settings, so let me close the terminal. So what I'll do is to come to the installed apps variable. Now installed apps is a list of the installed apps. For example, we have the default installed apps for our Django project. So we're going to add the to-dos app. So to do that, what we're going to do is to refer to the class of the config that we've copied. So we have found that within to-dos.apps, then we are going to specify that's going to be the to-dos config. So I'll do is to come within settings, and within settings here, what I'll do is to say this is going to be to-dos.apps. Then I'm going to copy in the config. So once I save that, we are going to go ahead and create our models. So I'm going to head over to models.py, and let's go ahead and create our models for our to-dos. So Django has its object relational mapper that helps us to create classes that are going to define how our database tables are going to be. So all of those inherit from a class called model, and that is from django.db. So we're going to see how to do that. So what I'll do is to come and create a simple class, and what I'm going to call this class, I'm going to call it to-do, and then it's going to inherit from models.model. Now once I've done that, we now have a class that we can create as a model that's going to help us to define a specific table in our database. So the first thing I'm going to provide is going to be our content for that specific to do, or what we may want to do. So in this case, what we want to do is to say that it's going to have, let's say, actually let's first document our, so I'll first pass this for now. So to avoid confusion, what I'm going to do is to basically write a simple doc string here that's going to document our model. So we're going to create a class, and this class is going to be to do, and we're going to have let's say content for this to do, or the specific thing that we want to do, and this is going to be a string. We're also going to have the priority. So in this case, we may add the priority, which is also going to be a string, and may also specify that this is going to be having choices. So we can say we're going to have choices as, let's say, low, medium, and high. So what I'll say is low. In this case, we can even say medium, and then we can also say that we're going to have some tasks being of high priority. So right after doing this, actually let me call this priority. So once I've done that, the next thing we're going to do is to go ahead and also specify whether these tasks have been done or not. So to do that, I'm going to create a variable called done, and this is going to be a boolean. So let's implement this using a class. So right now I've created a class to do, and this is going to have the different attributes that we've specified here. So I'm going to go ahead and start writing them. So the first thing is going to be our content. So our content is going to be models.car field. So this is going to be a character field, and then we can specify a max length. So I'll say this is going to have a max length. Let's say the max length of each to do can be, let's say, 400 characters. And then right here I can even specify the priority. So we are going to say that priority is going to be equal to a character field as well. So this is going to be models.character field. And then we can also go ahead and specify the max length. So this is going to have a max length of, let's say this is going to be 10, and since it's going to be choices, so we're going to provide the choices argument, and then we're going to go ahead and create a tuple of choices. So I'll come right here, and what I'll do is to specify that this is going to be a priority. So we're going to say these are going to be priorities, so priorities. And this is going to be a tuple containing the different priorities. So the first thing is going to be for our high. So in this case, actually, let's start with low, then we go to medium and then high. So we're going to start with low, and then the value will be low. So when we input low, we shall be actually having our value as low in the database. So we can also go ahead and specify medium, and then this should also be medium. And then let's do the same thing for high. So we're going to have high, and this will also be high. So I put a comma right here. So what we're going to do is to come inside here, and we shall say that we're going to have our choices as priorities. So once we've done this, then the next thing is going to be to specify the done attribute. So done is going to be a boolean. So we're going to say done is going to be equal to models dot boolean, and then this is going to have a default. So it's going to have a default of false. So right after doing this, we're also going to specify a method that's simply going to return string representation of these objects. So to do that, I'm going to say def, and this is going to be str, then we're going to have self. Then what's going to return is simply the content of that specific to do. So in this case, what we're going to say is return self dot content. Now after we've done this, the next thing is going to be to migrate our changes to the database. So with Django, when you create models like this, we make migrations for them and then be able to map them onto our database, as we're going to see. So I'm going to pull up our terminal, and the first thing I'm going to do is to create the migration. So you may be wondering what a migration is. So if you look into our to-dos app, actually let me first minimize this. So within our to-do, we have a to-do project, which is having the different configurations. Now we also have the to-dos, which is going to be our app in this case. So within to-dos, you have a migrations folder. So this migrations folder is going to contain the different migrations that are going to show us how our database is changing with time. So what I'm going to do is to create our first migration. So I'm going to head over to the terminal. And what I'm going to do is to say python manage.py make migrations. So we're having an error here. So this is actually boolean. So let me try to fix this. This is going to be models.boolean field. So I'm going to fix this. It's going to be boolean field, and then I'm going to run the command once again. So this is going to create our migration, and if we look into here, we have our migration created. So when I click onto this migration, it's going to show us the different migration that have been created. So here we see migrations.create model, and then you see the different fields that we've created for our to-do model. So I'm going to close this. Now we simply have this migration, and we haven't yet mapped it onto our database. We haven't actually created these tables in the database yet. So to do that, what I'll do is to pull up the terminal once again and run python manage.py and then migrate. So this is going to go ahead and migrate all of the changes we are having onto our database. So I have a tool called DB Browser for SQLite 3. That's also going to help us to monitor how our database is going to be. We're going to be able to see all the tables that we've created and how they are. So I'm going to pull it up. So I'm going to go ahead and open the database. So when I open the database, I'm going to navigate to where our project is. So within our to-do project. So I'm going to open that db.sqlite3, and right now we have the different tables that Django creates for us. So we have the different auth tables, for example, auth group permissions, auth user. So we are having our user table, which is auth user. Now what we're interested in is the to-do table. So if I click on the to-do table, we have the ID, the content, the priority, and then done. So our table has now been created in the database. So the next thing we're going to do is to create a serializer. So think of a serializer as a way that we're going to be able to return data from the server to our users, and the way for which users are going to pass data to our server. So think of it as an interface between the clients and our server. They're going to help us to validate data that we pass to the server, as well as to respond to what the users want. So let's go ahead and create our first serializer. So I'm going to head over to our Visual Studio Code, and what I'm going to do, I'm first going to close the terminal for now. So I'm going to minimize all of this. So I'll go to to-dos within our to-do app and then create a new file. So I'm going to create this file and call it serializers.py. So just like I explained, our serializer is basically going to help us to be able to help us to validate data that we pass on to the API, as well as to be able to pass data to our clients. So we're going to go ahead and create these serializers. So serializers come from Django REST Framework, and we haven't yet installed it. So the first thing we're going to do is to install Django REST Framework. So I'm going to pull up our terminal right here, and our virtual environment is still activated. So I'll say pip install Django REST Framework. So this is going to install Django REST Framework within our virtual environment. So now that Django REST Framework has been installed, we're going to go ahead and set it up to work with our project. So I'm going to head over to our settings.py within our to-do project. And what I'll do is to go to settings, and within our settings and our installed apps, we're going to also add our Django REST Framework. So I'm going to come and say REST Framework. Now after adding REST Framework, the next thing we're going to do is to be able to create our serializer from Django REST Framework. So I'm going to head over to serializers.py, and we're going to import serializers from Django REST Framework. Now serializers come from Django REST Frameworks, and in this case we're going to use model serializers. So model serializers help us to serialize, to turn our model objects into JSON, because JSON is the way that we can be able to communicate across these different applications. So let's say we're going to import serializers from REST Framework. So I'll say from REST Framework, we are going to import our serializers. And after importing our serializers, the next thing is going to be to create our serializer. So what we're going to do is to create our serializer. So we're going to call this the to-do serializer. And within our to-do serializer, we're going to inherit from serializers.model serializer. So what I'm going to say is, this is going to be model serializer. And as I've explained, our model serializer is going to help us to turn our database objects from our ORM into JSON that we're going to serve onto our clients. So what we're going to do is to create a class. We're going to create a class called meta, and then this meta class is going to help us to define the different things specific to the model that you want to serialize. So I'm going to first import our model. So I'll say from .models, I'm going to import our to-do. So to-do is the model that you're going to serialize, which we have created down here. So I'm going to come and then specify. So I'll specify the different things, such as the model that you're going to serialize, and this model is going to be our to-do model. So this is going to be our to-do model. Then I can also go ahead and specify the different fields that we shall avail on our to-do model. So what I'll do is to come and say that fields, and fields is going to be a list of fields. So I'll come and refer to our model. So here I have content, priority, and done. So in this case, what I'll do is to actually say a content. Actually, the first thing we shall need is the ID. So the ID is automatically generated by the database. So I can specify it right here. So I'll say ID, and then this is going to be content. So it will also be a string. So then we're going to also have let's say this is going to be done and the priority. So in this case, we're going to have done and then the priority. So once we have this, then the next thing we're going to do is to create our views. So think of views as the functions that are going to return back our responses in case we send a request onto those specific views. So let's go ahead and create our views. So right in here within our to-do app, we are having our views file already created for us. So we're going to make use of our serializer to return responses every time we send requests onto those views. So we're going to go to views.py, and within views, the first thing we're going to do is to import our serializers. So since the serializers are in the same folder, I'll come and say from import serializer. So this is going to import serializers, and after importing serializers, we're going to also import our model. So I'll say from models, we are going to import, this is going to be our to-do model. So our to-do model is that one we created right in here. So I'm going to go ahead and also import it. So we're going to be making use of generic APIs. So generic views are those that Django REST Framework provides for us, and they provide us with custom ways of how to deal with our database models. So think of them as the way we're going to be making use of methods. For example, get, post, put, delete onto our database models in the way we want. So I'm going to also import them. So I'm going to say from REST Framework, we are going to import generics. So generics, we can have generic mixins as well as generic views, just like we're going to see. So we're going to go ahead and create the different views. So we're going to make use of the generic API view that allows us to do different HTTP methods onto our view functions. So what I'm going to do is to create a class. So the first class we're going to do is going to be our to-dos. So we call this to-dos view, and this is going to be inheriting from generics dot generic API. So it's going to be generic API view. So the generic API view allows us to have methods such as get, post, put, delete as our methods or our view functions. So in this case, what we want is to first work on a method that basically gets all our to-dos. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll say def, and I'll specify the method. In this case, the method is going to be get. It will take in self and then the request. So the request object is going to be a type of type HTTP request. So what I can do is to also use type hinting to basically state what it's going to be. So I'll say from Django.http, I'm going to import HTTP request. And right after doing that, I'm going to come and specify that this is going to be of type HTTP request. And after doing that, I'm going to come and also specify that actually I'm going to pass this for now. And after passing this, we're also going to work on one. So let me actually add a doc string right here. So this is actually going to be for getting all to-dos. So another thing we're going to do is to specify that we're going to specify the method that's going to allow us to create a new to-do. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'll do is say def. So this is actually going to be so this will be def, and this will be post. So this will take in self, and then it will also be a request of type HTTP request. So we're also going to pass this for now. Now let's also go ahead and create those that are going to act on a specific to do. So in this case, I'm going to create a class which is going to be our to do. This is going to be to do view, so I'm just going to call it to do view because it's going to be acting on one specific to do resource. So what I'll do is say it's going to be from generics. Actually, I forgot this. This is going to be generics.generic API view. So this is going to be generics.generic API view. So once we have this, then we're going to go ahead and basically create the different methods. So the first thing we're going to create is to get one. So we shall specify that this is going to be self, and then it's going to have the request object, which is going to be of type HTTP request, and then you can also specify the ID. We're going to pass this. Now the different methods are going to be similar, so I'll just come and copy this. So I'll come and copy this and paste it. So I'm going to go ahead and paste it and then specify the different methods. So right here in our mini documentation that we showed, we have the forgetting. So right here, let me close this. So right here in our views, we have one forgetting all to-dos, which is our slash to-dos. Actually, sorry for that, which is our slash to-dos. And we also have that one for creating a to-do, which is our slash to-do. So if I look in here, we have one for getting. So this is going to be actually for creating a to-do. So after that, then this is going to be for getting a to-do, which is going to be here. So this is for getting a to-do by its ID. So that's what we have here. So I'm also going to add a doc string right here. So this is going to be for get a to-do by ID. And right in here, we are also going to have that one for updating a to-do. So if I go here, I have the one with the put method. I was also going to get to update a to-do by its ID. So I'm going to call this a put method. So it's going to be a put method, and then I'll add the doc string. It's going to be update a to-do by ID. So this is going to be for deleting a to-do by its ID. So in this case, we're going to say it's going to be deleting a to-do by its ID. So I'll come and add a doc string right here. So this is going to be delete a to-do by ID. And the next thing is going to be for one that's going to be able to update the status or update this done attribute on each to do. So what we're going to do is to make this a patch request, because we specified it as a patch request right here. So I'm going to come and call it patch. Sorry for that, it's going to be patch. Then right in here, what I'll do is to come and basically document it. So I'll come and say that this is going to be updating status of a to do. So right after doing this, then the next thing we're going to do is to be able to define the specific logic that's going to attach to these different routes. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and create the different URLs that are going to map onto these views so that we'll be able to actually access those specific routes. So what I'll do is to go in our to-dos application. I'll create a new file which I'm going to call urls.py. And then within urls.py, I'm going to go ahead and create the different URL configurations that are going to be the URLs specific to those view functions. So what I'll do is the first thing I'm going to import is path, which is going to help us to create these URLs. So I'll say, sorry for this. So I'll say from Django.urls, I'm going to import path. And right after importing path, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a list of URL patterns. So I'll create this list and call it URL patterns. And this is going to be a list. So I'm going to create path, and then within our path, I'm going to create the different URLs. So the first URL I'm going to create is the one for for to-dos. Sorry for that. So this is going to be for to-dos. and then I'm going to provide a slash. So every URL that will be specific to to-dos is going to map us onto a certain view class. So right in here, we're going to map this onto our to-dos view. So I'm going to come right here and import our views. So I'll say from dot, I'm going to import our views. And after importing our views, then I'm going to come and specifically add the view specific to to-dos view, and I'm going to attach this to this URL. So what I'm going to do is to say it's going to be views. Sorry for this. So it's going to be views dot, and what we shall have is to-dos view, and then it's going to be as view. Since it's a class-based view, then we're going to also attach a name to it. So I'll call this to-dos. And after that, then we're also going to attach the one for to-do view onto its URL. So what we're going to do is to say path, and then we're going to have to-do. Then this is going to be views dot to-do view dot as view. So since it's a class-based view, we are going to specify that it's going to be as a view. Then we shall provide the name as to-do. So actually we have an ID because this view requires us to have an ID. So we're also going to attach it. So we're going to make this to-do slash to-do, then slash an ID that is going to be an integer. So I'm going to save this. Now let's go ahead and implement the various logic for our routes. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and attach these URLs onto our main project. So to do that, I'll head over to our to-do project, and within our urls.py, our main urls.py, I am going to go and add them. So what I'll do is say path, and then it's going to be on our root endpoint or our root URL of our application. We're also going to just include the URL specific to our to-dos. So I'll import include, which is a function that's going to help us to include those URLs. So I'm going to say include, and then I'll basically pass in the URLs that you want to include. So the URLs are going to be the ones for to-dos. So I'll say to-dos.urls, which is going to point to to-dos, then urls.py, where we have our URL patterns. So if I save this, hoping that our server is still running. Actually, we don't have a server. So if I run this, it's going to be Python manage.py run server. And if we don't have any errors, that will show that our routes are working. So now we have serializers. So let's actually work on this. So if I head over to serializers, I'm going to fix this. It's going to be our serializers. And we also have here, so generic API view. So let's actually see. So this is going to be in our views. So let's fix this. So it's going to be generic API view. Made a mistake here, so let me fix it. And now our server is running. That shows that we don't have any errors. So I'm going to Ctrl+C to stop our server. Now what you're going to do is to go ahead and implement the various logic for these routes. Now the first thing we're going to do is to return all to-dos. So to return all to-dos, we need a way of querying our database to return a query set having all the to-dos in our database. So to do that, what I'm going to do is first remove this pass statement, and then I'm going to create a variable called to-dos, and then this is going to be our query set of to-dos. So what I'll do is to come and make use of the to-do model. So this is going to be to-dos dot objects. So we're going to query for all objects of that to-do within our database. Then I'm going to say dot all. So this is going to return a list of to-dos. Then the first thing we're going to also do is to specify a serializer class for our generic API view. So to do that, I'm going to come and provide it as a variable right in here. So I'll say serializer class. And our serializer class is going to be, so we imported serializers right here. So we shall say it's going to be serializers dot. Then what we shall do is to import our to-do serializer. So this is going to be to-do serializer. Now after doing this, then we shall need a way of returning this object or this query set as a list of our to-dos. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'll come and do is create a variable called serializer, and this is going to be having a serializer. So we shall have self dot our serializer class, which we have mentioned within our class right here. So this is going to be our serializer class. Then we're going to specify the following. So this takes in the instance. The instance is that data we want to return as JSON. So we're going to say that instance is going to be equal to to-dos. And also going to specify that we're also going to determine whether we want this to return a list or one object. So in this case, we want to return a list of these various objects. So what we shall do is say comma, then it's going to have the attribute many, specifying that you want many items. So we're going to say it's going to be many is equal to true, and then we're going to return a response containing the data that we shall need. Now REST framework allows us to return responses. So we're going to create an instance of a response, and it's going to have the data that we're going to return within our serializer. So what we're going to do is to import response from Django REST framework. So I'll say from REST framework. From REST framework, I'm going to import our, actually this is going to be from REST framework dot response. I'm going to import our response class. And after importing our response class, then we're going to go ahead and basically return our response. So to do that, I'm going to come right here, and what I'll do is to say return, then we're going to return a response. And this response is going to have two things. It's going to have the data as well as the status code. So the first thing we're going to specify is going to be the data that is going to be in that response. So that's going to be whatever comes as a result of serializing our query set. So we're going to have serializer dot data, and then what we shall need is to also return a status code. Now the beauty with REST framework is that it has all the status code that you may need to return with every response that we have. So what I'll do is to also import status from REST framework. So I need to import status, and after importing status, then I'll come here and say that we need our status to be equal to our status dot, then we want to specify that it's going to be HTTP 200. Okay, I'm going to save this. Now we're going to try to run this on our, so I'm going to use Insomnia first, then we shall see how to use the browsable API. So I'm going to go to my Insomnia. So I'm going to create, I already have a request collection I've created. So I'm going to go ahead and create a request, and then this request is going to be one for getting all. So I'm going to call this get all to-dos. And this is going to be a get request, so I'm going to specify that it's going to be a get request. Now it's going to be at localhost 8000 / to-dos. So we're going to have this at localhost 8000 / to-dos. So when I send this, so our server is not running, so let me start the server once again, and we're going to start with python manage.py run server. So it has started. So if I head over to Insomnia and make this request again, we now have this. So as view takes one positional argument, but two are given. So let's try to see. When I go back to our Visual Studio Code, and within our URLs, so we actually call this as view. So actually call it as view. Forgot to call this. So when I save and head over to our Insomnia once again, so when I make this request, in this case it returns an empty array or an empty list of objects. However, we need to create some objects or some objects of the type to do, which are going to be returned to us. So we're going to see how to create them. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a to do. So what I'll go to, I'll go to views.py, and then within views.py, I'm going to head over to this view function right here. So this is one that's going to help us to create a to-do. So I'll come, and what we shall have to get first is the data that comes along with the request. So I'm going to say data is going to be equal to request.data. So request.data is a dictionary that's going to contain all the information from any client that you may send data to the server from. So what we're going to do is to access it and store that data within our data variable. So then the next thing we're going to also do is to access our serializer. So I'm going to say serializer. So serializer is going to be equal to self.serializer. So we're going to create an instance of our serializer class, which is here, the to-do serializer. And then after creating the to-do serializer instance, the next thing is going to be true. So this is going to be self.serializer class, and then we shall pass in our data. So in this case, our data is going to be equal to request.data. So what we're doing here is we are getting the data from our request and then passing it in our serializer. So what our serializer is going to do is to validate whether this data matches what our serializer requires, and then goes ahead and saves that data to our database. So let's see how we do that. So after specifying that our data is request.data, the next thing we're going to do is to check if all our validations have been met. So we're going to say if serializer dot is valid. So this is when all the serialization checks, all our validation checks have been met. Then we're going to go ahead and use this serializer. So since we're using a model serializer, we can be able to save to the database. So we're going to say serializer.save. And then after this, we're going to return a response of 201 created that shows us that we've created a new resource on our API. So we're going to actually do this by returning, then we're going to create a response instance, and then this is going to be having a status of a status dot http 201 created, as well as we're going to also have our data. So we're going to return some data with this request. So we're going to say data is going to be equal to the data that we pass in our serializer. So that's going to be actually data serializer.data. So after doing this, then we're also going to think of a scenario in which we have errors. So in that case, we need to return an error. So what we're going to do is to return. We're going to also return a response. So I'm actually going to copy this. So I'm going to copy this. Sorry for this. So I'm going to copy, and I'll paste this, but what we're going to change is our response status code. So in this case, we're going to have http 400 bad request, and then what we shall have as our data, let me actually remove this. So our data in this case is going to be any error that we may have as a result of serializing. So I'll say serializer dot, in this case we can access it from errors. So I'll say serializer dot errors. So when I save this, we're going to go ahead and use our Insomnia to create a to-do. So what I'll do is to come to Insomnia, and then I'm going to create a request, and this request is going to be for creating. So I'm going to say create a to-do. So this is going to be a post request, and we need to create it. So I'll come to the body section and I specify that we want to send JSON. So I'm going to create a JSON object right here. So the first thing we need is content of our to do. So we're going to have content, and let's say this is going to be land Python, and then let's say we're going to have its priority. So I'm going to specify the priority as, let's say, high, and since we have a default of done, so we're going to have done as false. So I'm also going to say done is going to be false. So when I send this, we expect it's going to create our to do with the given attributes. So what I'm going to do is to actually specify the URL as localhost 8000 / to-dos. So when I send this, we now have a validation error. So here we have high is not a valid choice. So let me go to models.py and try to see the choices that we have. So when I go to our models.py, we are actually having this, so it's actually supposed to be high. So when I save this, I've corrected this. So when I go to our insomnia and try to send this request once again, we now see that our to do has been created. So let's say if we are to get all to dos, this time we expect our request to return with a list containing one to do. So if I go to get all to dos and say get all to dos, in this case we see that it's returning one to do object. So let's go ahead and implement another route. So when I go back to our views, we are having now that a view that we want to return is one for getting a single to do by its ID. So what I'm going to do is to first query for that from our database. So I'll come and create to do. So I'll say to do is going to be equal to, so we have that to do model, then dot objects. Then in this case, we're going to get that specific object that has its primary key as the ID that we've specified in our view function. The next thing is going to be to use our serializer to return that specific to do. So I'm going to specify our serializer class right in here as our to do serializer. So I'm going to say serializer class. In this case, our serializer class is going to be serializers dot to do serializer. So right after doing this, then the next thing is going to be to return our to do from our serializer. So we need to create a variable called serializer. Sorry for this. So it's going to be serializer, and then this serializer variable is going to be an instance of our serializer class. So I'll say self.serializer class. And then right in here, what we're going to put in is our to do. So our to do in this case is going to be an instance that we're going to return via our serializer. So I'll say instance is going to be to do. And right after doing this, then we're going to return a response containing our to do. So what I'm going to say is return response. And in this case, what we need is the status code. So I'll say status is going to be equal to status dot http 200, okay, and then what we shall need is the data as well. So the data is simply going to be our instance, which is our serializer. So in this case, we shall say serializer, and then we would want to access the data in that serializer, so we shall say dot data. So I'm going to save, and let's try this within our insomnia. So I'm going to go to insomnia right here, and what I'll do is to create a new request. So I'll call this get to do. So right here, it's going to be a get request. So I'm going to create this. Then I'll specify our URL as localhost 8000 slash ID. Actually, it's going to be slash to do slash ID1, because right now we are having. So when I go back to our URLs, so if I go back to our URLs right here, we have that as slash to do slash ID, which is an integer. So when I go back to insomnia right here, we are going to get this. So when I send this, it's going to return that specific to do with that ID of 1. So let's go ahead and implement another route. So the next route we're going to implement is one for updating an ID to do by its ID in this case. So the first thing we're going to do is to also query for that to do with that ID. So what I'm going to do is to come right here and basically specify that our to do is going to be this to do. So what we need is to actually check if this exists, and if it doesn't exist, then what we're going to do is return a 404 error. Now, thanks to our response class, we can be able to do that. So what I'm going to do is to check. So the first thing we're going to do is to check. So I'm going to come and say we're going to check. So I'm going to say if to do. Actually, if to do, we're going to actually first execute if to do is not none. So I'll say if to do is not none. Then what we're going to do is to serialize. So I'll say serializer. So we're going to create an instance of our serializer class. It's going to be self.serializer class, and then right in here we're going to have the first thing we're going to have is our instance, which is the data I want to update. So we're going to say our instance is going to be equal to our to do, and then we shall also have data that is coming to update this specific to do item. So I'll say that the data is going to be equal to the data from our request. So we're going to say this is going to be request dot data. Then what we shall need to do in this case is to check if this serializer is valid, and if it's valid, then we go ahead and save the result in our database. So I'm going to say if serializer, so in this case we need if serializer dot is valid. So in this case I'm going to say serializer dot is valid. Then I'm going to go ahead and basically save this. So we shall say serializer dot save. And now after doing this, we are going to return a response with that specific updated data. So I'll say return, and in this case I'm going to create an instance of our response. So we're going to say return response, and then we're going to have our data as serializer dot data, and then we're going to also have our status code. So I'll say status is going to be equal to status dot http 200. Okay, now after doing that, then you're also going to catch an error. So in this case, what I'm going to say else, if it's none, what you want to do is to return a response of 404 not found. So I'm going to actually just come here and say return response. So in this case, what I'll do is to say we're going to have our data being equal to, so in this case what I'll do is to create a simple dictionary, and I'll give it a message of, let's say, resource not found. And then the next thing I'm also going to specify is going to be our status code. So in this case our status code, so I'll say status is going to be equal to a status dot http 404 not found. So right here what we're going to do is to go ahead and basically also catch a situation in which we have serializer errors. So to do that, I'm going to simply copy this serializer, this response, and then go ahead and simply put it just right here. So when we have any other error, then we're just going to return the serializer error. So we're going to say that our data is going to be serializer dot errors. And once I save this, so let's go ahead and try this. So I'm going to head over to Insomnia and try to make use of this. So I'm going to come within Insomnia, hoping that our server is running. Yes, it is. So if I go back right in here within our Insomnia, I'm going to create a new request, and then this new request is going to be for updating to do. So it's going to be a put request. So I'm going to create it, and within our body it's going to be a JSON. So I'll specify, I'm actually going to go ahead and go to where we create a to do. I'm going to copy this and come back right here. Then I'm going to basically paste this, and right in here what I'm going to do is to basically change to land, let's say land JavaScript, and right in here I'll just come and give our URL. So it's going to be localhost 8000 / to do, and since we have only one, it's going to be /1. Actually, let's first try when you have two. So when I send this, we have a 500 internal server error. To do matching query does not exist. So let's try when you have that of 1. So if I said 1 and I sent this, so now we have our to do updated. So let's try to actually query for it. For example, if I get all to do's, and in this case we're going to have it updated to land JavaScript. So let's go ahead and also see one to delete our to do. So I'm going to come right in our VS Code, and I'm going to go to that specific that specific one for deleting a to-do. So it's going to be the same thing. So what I'll do is to actually first get, so I'm going to actually copy this query. So it's going to actually be our to-do. So I'll come right in here and provide this query that's going to get our to-do. And after getting this to-do, then what we're going to do is simply say to-do. Actually, what I'll do is say to-do to delete to prevent confusion. And this is going to also be to-do to delete. And then I'll just call dot delete, so as to delete this to-do. So right after deleting it, what we need to do is to return a response of status code 204 no content. So what we're going to do is to say return a response, and this is going to have a status of status dot http 204 no content. So just after having this, then what we're going to do is to be able to return this. So let's go ahead and test this route. So once I go to insomnia, I'm going to go to insomnia right here, and within our insomnia, I'm going to go and test this route for deleting a recipe. So I mean deleting a to-do, sorry for this. So it's going to be delete, call this delete to-do. So it's going to be a delete request. I'm going to go ahead and create it, and what I'll do here is to say it's going to be localhost 8000 / to-do / so let's go ahead and first create other to-do. So in this case, I'm going to say learn Java and create this. So this is going to create one with ID of 2, which is learn Java. So let's say we're going to create one for let's say watch TV. So when I create this, it's going to be of IDs 3. So let's say we're also going to have one for, let's say, play Call of Duty. So when I send this, we're going to have one for play Call of Duty. So if I were to get all to-dos, in this case would have 4 to-dos. So let's try to work on one that's going to delete one. So if I say delete one of ID 1 and I send, so right now we have so this actually returned a response of class none type. Let's see what happens. So right here we have that specific view function is going to delete our to-do. So what we do is to get that to-do to delete, and then we delete it in our database. Then we return a status code of 204 no content. So what I've done here is to actually go ahead and be able to delete that specific to-do. So when I go to insomnia right here, send this request, we now have an error because it does not exist on our backend. That's now it's deleted. So let's go ahead and implement that. It's going to help us to update our status of our to-do. So what I'll do is to basically get that to-do. So I'm going to copy this query, and then I'll query this. I'll query that specific to-do. So in this case, I'm going to call it to-do to update. And right after that, the next thing is going to be to basically get a serializer, form an instance out of this, and then also get the data that we're going to pass to the server. So to do that, I'll say serializer is going to be equal to self.serializer class. And then right in here, what we're going to do is to say that our serializer instance is going to be our to-do to update. So we're going to call this to-do to update. And right here, then we are going to actually also pass in the data that we're going to pass. So the data is going to be request .data. So we're going to call this request.data. Now the next thing we're going to also say is that we're going to have partial equals to true, meaning that we're going to allow what we're going to do is to allow to update only specific fields specific to this object that we are updating. So I'll do is to specify partial equals to true. So right after doing that, then the next thing we shall check is if our serializer is valid. Then we're going to go ahead and basically save the serializer. So we're going to say serializer dot save, and right after doing this, then we're going to return a response. So I'll say return response. Then we're going to have our status. So in this case, our status is going to be status dot http 200. Okay. And then what we shall also do is to determine the data we are returning. So the data is going to be our updated object. So it's going to be serializer dot data. Now after doing this, then we're also going to catch the scenario in which we have an error. So what we'll do is to return a response. So we're going to return a response, and then that response is simply going to be that response is going to have a status of http 400 bad request. So in this case, we're going to say http 400 bad request, and then in this case what we're going to do is to basically return the errors that we have. So in this case, what I'll do is to say that the data is going to be serializer dot errors. So when I save this, let's go ahead and try to test that. So when I come here, I'm going to come and say new request. So this is going to be for updating to do status. So this is going to be a patch request. So I'm going to create it, and right in here what I'll do is specify that it's going to be JSON. So I'll come right in here to creating a to do. So I'm going to come to updating a to do status, and then I'll pass this in. So right in here what I expect is to basically update this to true. So I'll come and provide the URL as localhost 8000 / to do. So I'm going to get a to do with, let's say, ID of 2, since we have deleted that one with ID of 1. So when I send this, actually having an error, true is not defined. So let me see. So let's see. So this is actually supposed to be true. Sorry for this. So when I save, and I go back here, so when I send this, we now see that our to-do status has been updated to true. In this video, we've been able to see how to create a simple to-do list API with the Django REST Framework. Now let me also show you something important that I was almost forgetting. So we have the browsable API that allows us to work with our API on our front end or on our browser. So when I refresh, in this case, we see no page found. But let's say we went to the specific route. For example, let's say to-dos. So if I go to to-dos right here, should either include a query set. Okay, so what I'll do is to provide a query set. Forgot to do that, so I'm going to come to our to-dos views and provide a query set. So this is going to be the query that specific browsable API is going to use to return this specific URL. So I'm going to provide the query set, and then this query set is going to be so in this case going to be to-dos. Actually going to be to do dot objects dot all. So once I have this and head over back to our browser, so in this case we see that Django REST Framework is going to provide us with a browsable API that's going to allow us to see the different to-dos that we've created. So we can also see how we can be able to post them. So for example, if I said post, so let's say I added here learn Django. So if let's say I added another to do called learn Django, and let's say I posted this. So right here we see that we've been able to create a to-do with ID of 5 called land Django. So let's say if we were able to get, so let's say we got, in this case we'd see that we've been able to create other to-dos, and we have a to-do specific with let's say an ID of 5 and it's land Django. So let's say we also went to that one with, let's say, localhost 8000 slash to do, and then let's say the one with ID of 5 that we created. So in this case, the browsable API is also going to give us a view for showing us the details of that specific to do, as well as showing us the way we can be able to update. For example, if we updated the priority to, let's say, medium, so if I say put, in this case we see that our priority has been updated to medium. So if I went back to getting this specific to do, we now see that its priority has been updated to medium. In this video, you've been able to see how to create a simple to-do list API using the Django REST Framework. Thank you for watching, guys, and if you like this video, please go ahead and leave a like, as it helps me out a lot. Also subscribe to the channel if you're new to this channel, as I'll be doing a lot of such content. Thank you for watching, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye.